In this next set of the Archie Sonic comics, we start getting a better idea of what new series writer Ken Penders will bring to this franchise, and get introduced to one of the most hated characters in the Archie canon. Welcome to Archie Sonic Episode 3, where we cover issues 19 through 24, as well as the Princess Sally miniseries of the classic Archie Sonic comic. These issues released between December 1994 and May 1995. While this period did coincide with the release of Knuckles Chaotix, it was almost a year before Archie finally released an adaptation of that comic, so we won't be covering that for a few more episodes. Issue 19 serves as a bit of a follow-up to issue 11, where we met Anti-Sonic the Hedgehog and his ridiculously dressed team. The main story of this issue, titled Night of a Thousand Sonics, features even more Sonics from around the multiverse, finally establishing just how insane some of these alternate worlds can go. Here, Sonic is approached by a half-roboticized Sonic clearly meant to be reminiscent of the Terminator, who warns that the Robotnik of this world had roboticized the freedom fighters of that universe and himself, ascending to become Robotnik. Also, interestingly, while it's stated here that Cyborg Sonic and Robotnik are from an alternate universe, a version of Robotnik later appears in issue 22 in what might be the canon future of the Prime Universe. It's unclear whether or not both of those Robotniks are the same, and the state of that universe in general. Personally, I don't think it's the canon future, but I know that many would disagree with me, so I leave it up to you folks to decide for yourselves. Give your opinions in the comments, and if people ask for it, maybe I'll make a solo video just about this one topic. Before moving on, since we'll be talking a lot about alternate universes going forward, the established name for the Archie Sonic universe is the Prime Universe, and this is the main universe that the multiverse circles around. So when I refer to the Prime Universe, I am referring to the main one we discuss in this series. Here, Robotnik seeks to collect a mythical object of power known as the Giant's Hand, probably a reference to the Infinity Gauntlet from Marvel Comics. The Sonics swiftly collect as many heroic alternate universe Sonics as they can and meet back in the Prime Universe, where Robotnik makes himself known, taunting the Robotnik of the Prime Universe. This angers our Robotnik enough that he agrees to team up with the Sonics in order to take down the poser who believes himself to be the most powerful Robotnik. Prime Robotnik, of course, is also planning on double-crossing the Sonics once they find the Giant's Hand. The Sonics venture down the Cosmic Interstate and into the Neutral Zone, a world devoid of color, where they find the Giant's Hand. However, while there, they come into conflict with Robotnik's SWAT bots, as well as his champion, Evil Sonic, who's chosen to side with Robotnik so he could become the only Sonic left in the multiverse. He's able to steal the Giant's Hand and depart before anyone can stop him. Using the hand, Robotnik creates a mech, the Giant Borg, which he uses to rampage through the Prime Universe. He fights with the Sonics before they dogpile him, knocking the Giant Borg to the ground and shattering the mech. The various Sonics agree to separate the pieces of the Borg to the distant corners of the multiverse, with each taking one part for themselves to keep the machine out of the hands of evil forever. And thus, the status quo is returned and we move on to the next story. Issue 20 is a relatively unimportant story. In attempting to stop an antimatter machine Robotnik has been threatening the freedom fighters with, Sonic briefly becomes intangible and disconnected from the world, becoming something similar to a ghost. Everyone, freedom fighter and mad genius alike, assume he's dead. And we do get to briefly see how each of these characters would react to Sonic dying in the line of duty, which is interesting. But Sonic isn't dead, so he decides to use this to his advantage to help his friends and mess with Robotnik. The second story in this issue, The Earliest of the Species Prologue, is far more interesting and acts as a prologue to the Princess Sally miniseries that released around this time. But since that story doesn't take place until after issue 23, we'll put off discussing it a little longer. Issue 21 is a mood setter for a good portion of the Penders Pen portion of the series. In it, Robotnik builds a self-teaching robot that can change anything about itself. Its coding, its AI, even its physical body, based on previous encounters with Sonic. Not only that, the robot was built partially using Sonic's own DNA, obtained from previous battles between Robotnik and the Blue Blur, and also partially from Robotnik's DNA, with the goal being to merge the former's resourcefulness with the latter's genius to form the perfect killing machine. The robot, known as Eve, faces off with Sonic a few times. First as something similar to a SWAT bot, then again as a version of a buzz bomber, and the third time as a giant snake, with Sonic and Co. none the wiser that it's the same bot each time, adapting to Sonic's strategies. Finally, she enters her final form. In combat with Sonic this time, she shows that she has evolved to the point where she can speak, stating that she was made to surpass her own limitations. And, like many robots have done in the past, she has realized that the greatest limitation to her goal of eliminating Sonic is the control of Dr. Robotnik. She vaporizes the Mad Doctor, leaving only a black mark on the floor. Dr. Robotnik is no longer of this world. Yeah, only 20 issues in and they kill off Robotnik. That is insane, but it will make more sense as we move forward. Finishing out this story, Eve turns back to Sonic, still intent on killing him, before he points out that she has the power to change her own programming, and thus the choice to stop trying to kill Sonic. Realizing that this core programming too is a limit, she removes it, and is able to ascend and leaves the planet to be free and live without boundaries. Issue 22 opens up on a familiar sight, the future timeline we saw back at the end of Sonic in Your Face, with King Sonic and Queen Sally enjoying the day with their children. Suddenly, in a flash of lightning, Robotnik appears, suddenly teleported here rather than killed in the last issue. Yeah, he didn't actually die. I'm sure this shocks all of you. His supposed death in the last issue was sudden and shocking, but even the comic itself admits that it doesn't feel final. And here he is, returned to the book, dead for only a grand total of, like, 5 pages? He appears before the stunned royal family for only a moment before disappearing again in a similar fashion. Here he finds the other Robotnik I mentioned earlier. He looks very similar to the version we saw in issue 19, and once again, you can decide for yourself if they're the same Robotnik. Personally, I don't think the stories line up. Here he states that this is an alternate timeline from the one Robotnik came from. But the comic does seem to go back and forth on the idea of whether or not that's the case, given that the in-your-face epilogue was implied to be the canon future of Sonic's world. He had noticed the arriving energy signature of our Robotnik, and summoned him here for company. Robotnik, as stated earlier, was forced to roboticize himself in order to escape defeat at the hands of Sonic, but was stuck on a half-finished space station, powerless and presumed dead. He has, in the years since, given in to despair and sits alone in his living tomb. However, the vigor of the biological Robotnik inspires Robotnik. Once more invigorated, Robotnik is able to use what few tools on the satellite still worked in order to send our Robotnik home, completely negating the earth-shattering impact of the last issue and immediately returning us to the status quo. Back in the Prime Universe, Snively watches on as the Freedom Fighters start to dismantle his uncle's empire. Snively despairs, but not for his uncle's death. Instead, he despairs for his own lack of power with Robotnik gone. This becomes a very important character trait for Snively later on, as he's constantly scheming behind his uncle's back. In his despair, Snively accidentally activates Operation Wasteland, a secret backup set up by Robotnik. In the case of his defeat, Robotnik's Robotic Legion would become fully homicidal, and attempt to destroy whatever they could to make sure that, if Robotnik didn't get to rule Mobius, then nobody would. It's right here that Robotnik returns, swiftly saving Snively from the robots, and then, after some hesitation, pulling the plug on his entire army before they could destroy the world, saving the Freedom Fighters from certain doom. Robotnik makes his survival known to them, and enjoys the feeling of knowing that, on that day, he had controlled Sonic's fate, and if that hedgehog were to die, it would be by his hands. There is actually a backup story in this issue, but it's just a made-up fairy tale, so it doesn't really matter. The main story of issue 23 is another one that doesn't matter as much. Titled Ivo Robotnik Freedom Fighter, it shows Robotnik, Snively, and the Freedom Fighters get kidnapped by a giant alien named Karheem from the planet Wheat. Don't laugh, it's not funny. They have to team up to escape. But, as usual, Robotnik betrays the Freedom Fighters' trust, and it's only thanks to the quick thinking of Rotor that Sonic and Karheem are saved from floating off into space. They're then all returned to Mobius, and Karheem leaves. The second story features Antoine sneaking into Robotropolis at night to retrieve some items that Tails had left behind, the entire way helped by a shadowy figure revealed at the end to be Bunny. This story is mostly a short, funny one made at Antoine's expense, but this is the first time we start getting hints of the eventual romance between these two freedom fighters. Between issue 23 and 24, we get the Princess Sally miniseries. It begins with a backup story of issue 20, Deadliest of the Species, and carries on as a single continuous story between that and the end of the 3-issue miniseries. In this story, Sally has taken a group of trainee freedom fighters, including Hamlin the Pig, Arlo the Armadillo, Penelope the Platypus, and Dylan the Porcupine, to destroy 3 substations that power Robotropolis, hoping to use the loss of power to stage an attack. While escaping the first substation, she meets him. He's hot, British, way out of her age range. Meet Jeffrey St. John, the skunk. This man was introduced explicitly to be a love interest for Sally, and is a Gary Stew to the nth degree. Penders gets really creepy about him and Sally, and I'm not a big fan of it. Nobody really seems to be. But I'm getting distracted. Jeffrey claims himself to be the leader of the Rebel Underground and former member of King Maximilian Acorn's, Sally's father's, Secret Service. On his way, funnily enough, to do exactly what Sally was doing. The two agree to work together and go back to Sally's team, who had been waiting for her return. They are immediately suspicious of Jeffrey, but she's able to keep the trainees from trying to fight him, and they call it a night. At the end of the first issue of the miniseries, Jeffrey sneaks off, creating a mysterious portal that leads to a large glass container in which sits Sally, unconscious. With this bombshell, we enter the second issue of the series. In this issue, on their way to the next substation, Arlo is injured in a crash landing and Penelope stays behind to protect him. They're able to destroy the second substation, but return to find Arlo and Penelope had completely disappeared, with no footprints leading away from where they'd been left. At the end of the issue, Jeffrey takes the sleeping Sally and brings her to the room from the end of the last issue, where Robotnik is waiting. He reveals that Jeffrey was working for him all along, and is replacing the kidnapped Sally with a robotic duplicate called an auto-automaton, a robot made to be a perfect copy of a person. In the third issue, we open up knowing that Sally has been switched out, and that Jeffrey has been working for Robotnik, but without Hamlin and Dylan realizing that anything was wrong. They set out for the third substation, but when they arrived, the treachery is revealed as Robotnik gloats that the substations were a ploy by him, and prepares to roboticize Sally for the trainees to watch. However, the roboticizer fries itself without being able to do so. It's then that Robotnik realized that he'd been tricked, and Sally leading the team reveals herself to have been the real thing. Jeffrey had told her about the double cross from the beginning, and they'd worked together to trick Robotnik into thinking that the Sally that was on display was the real one, and not the android. After that, Jeffrey's team, the Rebel Underground, appeared, with the missing trainees in tow. They apparently came to the rescue of the stranded freedom fighters while the rest of the team had been destroying the second substation. And yes, they're gophers. The Rebel Underground literally works underground. Don't laugh, don't do it. In the end, despite the double crosses, the freedom fighters and the Rebel Underground are able to escape in one piece. They part on friendly terms. Too friendly, in fact. Canonically, Jeffrey's 20, while Sally's only about 16. But that's the end of the story, and the last we need to deal with this skunk for this episode. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. Alright, what do we have here? Another Evil Sonic story. That sounds like a good way to clear our palates after that monstrosity. While Sally was away with the trainees, the rest of the main team of freedom fighters had been attempting to travel to the Zone of Silence, the plane of existence where Robotnik had sent Sally's father. However, not wanting to give her hope when they were unsure if there was any at all, they were only doing it when they could hide from her what they were doing, meaning that all of the freedom fighters were busy. During that time, Evil Sonic was attacked by his own version of Sally, who was extremely bored after they conquered their Mobius. Demanding a good fight, Evil Sonic hits on the idea of invading Prime Mobius and posing as their main universe counterparts to turn the world against the freedom fighters. This worked for a time until the freedom fighters tricked them into a battle, which the evil freedom fighters do eventually lose. But while they were sent home, the doppelgangers still got what they wanted: a good fight. This seems like a good place to stop. We're approaching the start of another large arc coming up. While the video was a little everywhere, it needed to end before we could hit that point. We got a lot more Evil Sonic, some real attempts to mess with the status quo, and a lot of Penders in this episode, so tell me in the comments what you think of this run of comics. Next time we'll cover issues 25 through 27, as well as the Sonic & Knuckles and Triple Trouble specials. So if you're reading along, pick those up in the next few months. As for the immediate future, we leave Sonic for his eternal nemesis, Mario, in a doctor's outfit. Find out more next week. And also, if you want to talk to me, feel free to join the Discord server I have linked in the description. I admit it's not very active right now, but I'm trying to get that community up and moving, so if you want to be a part of it, now's the time. And with that, I will see all of you next week. Until then.